Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I have a question for you. What do you know about Japanese literature? I've been asking myself the question as I've been traveling through Japan for a few weeks this summer, and I wanted to take this chance to make a video about my travels and also about a little bit of a brief history of Japanese literature. We will travel backwards in time, starting with the Edo period and going back to the Heian and Nara period and even the Kofun period, lasting from around 300 to 500 AD. So are you ready for this trip through literary Japan? Then let's go! So, before we get right into it, a proper welcome or welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of comparative literature in Germany. And this summer I went to Japan for 3 whole weeks. I've been loving traveling through the cities and also the countryside and exploring Japan's culture in all possible ways. And in a way to escape the heat, I've been trying to track down some literary places and to learn about the Japanese literature and history. And I thought I could take you along through some stations of Japanese literature by showing you where I've been traveling. I've been starting my travels in Tokyo, then I've been traveling onwards to Kyoto. I've been visiting a city of Sakai near Osaka, where the Kofun burial mounds are to be found. Then I took a little detour to Shikoku and later to Kanazawa, which is on the northern coast of Japan. And in the end I got back to Tokyo. So we will travel backwards in time, as this seemed to make a lot of sense to me. And in the end we will come back to modern times in the 20th century. So when arriving to Japan, my travels have been starting in Tokyo, which is the capital today, as you know, and it has also been the capital in the so-called Edo period, as Tokyo was formerly called Edo. And this was a time of unprecedented peace and stability in Japan, which lasted for over 250 years, from 1603 to 1868. And in that time, Japan was ruled by the so-called Tokugawa shogunate, which was formed by the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. And the shogun and the shogunate, they provided for a very stable and peaceful time. But this peace also came along with the establishment of a very rigid class system and a policy of national isolation. I don't know if you heard about it, but Japan has been isolated from all of the rest of the world for quite a long time. And only in the Meiji Restoration from 1868 they were forced to open their borders for trade, especially with the Americas. So, culturally it was also a very dynamic time, which was also happening because of the peace and stability that was providing for the possibility to build new cultural formats. And the urban centers were also growing in that time, especially because the prosperity was bigger and people tended to move more into the city. Especially Edo was a very vibrant center where a lot of culture and cultural products were created. So, for example, woodblock prints, ukiyo-e are they called, the kabuki theater, new forms of prose and also the haiku poetry. All of them were influential in the Edo period. And the literature itself was defined by a fully commercial publishing industry and the rise of an urban merchant class. And the literary genres also became more diverse, and they reflected the new and pleasure-seeking culture of the so-called floating world, the ukiyo, which I will talk about in a second. So keep that in mind. It was a peaceful time in which a lot of new cultural forms were created. So I've been mentioning the ukiyo-zoshi already. It is the first major genre of popular fiction, and they are called books of the floating world and depict the urban life of the commoners, more or less. A key characteristic is their focus on realism and a detached, often cynical tone. And the genre was pioneered by an author called Ihara Saikaku, whose works such as The Life of an Amorous Man defined a new gritty realism in Japanese literature. Then there's also the Geisaku, meaning playful writing, and it covers a variety of literary Edo genres. For example, the Kibyoshi, small illustrated comic books that use satire to comment on social and political issues. There's the Kokkeibon, humorous novels relying on slapstick and dialogue. Jipenchak Ikku is the most famous author of that, and he's known for his comic travelogue Tokaidochu Hisakurige. Then there's also the Ninjobon, which is focused on romantic and emotional relationships, and these novels were primarily aimed at women. The most famous author of these is Taminaga Shunsui, known for her Shunshoku Omego Yomi. I can't go into detail on all of these, just for you to get an impression of the kinds of works. So you had like romantic works, you had humorous novels, you had comic and satire, and all of these different kinds of genres that show you that especially the urban life of the people was depicted and directly worked with in these literary genres. And then there's also drama. The drama, there's most important the joruri, which is a form of puppet theater, which is known for its powerful literary narratives, which are chanted by a narrator with a shamisen, which is a musical instrument with only 3 strings. The most celebrated playwright is called Chikamatsu Monzaemon. I don't know if you heard of him. He's also referred to as the Shakespeare of Japan for his writing because they are so popular. And one of the most important ones is the Sonezaki Shinju, and he's been able to captivate audiences in a very good way. So it's definitely worth checking out Chikamatsu Monzaemon if you're interested in drama from that period, or general, the Joruri drama. There's also Kabuki, which is a live actor dance drama known for its spectacle. And its key characteristics include highly stylized movements, very elaborate costumes, and dramatic makeup, called kumadori. And the plays were often actually adapted from Joruri, but Kabuki developed its own theatrical conventions, such as the Hanamichi walkway extending into the audience. And then lastly, for the poetry, one of the most important and notable figures is Matsubasho, writing haiku. The haiku genre was popular before, but it was gaining more and more popularity throughout the Edo period. And Basho was in the 1600s a very famous haiku writer already, and he's also been teaching haiku writing to a lot of other people. So he was definitely very influential, and he's also been writing a so-called travelogue. It is like a mixture between haiku poetry and a travel diary or a travel literature. So I will talk about that in more detail in another video. But from the Edo period, we want to go now to the Muromachi period. And we'll just have a very short stopover in the Azuchi Momoyama period. So let's go. So the period between the Muromachi period and the Edo period is called Azuchi Momoyama period. It lasted from 1573 to 1603, so 30 years. So it's a relatively short period in comparison to the other periods we will be talking about. And it was very important for Japan's history because it was a transitional period that was characterized by the reunification of Japan after a civil war that lasted over 100 years. And it was dominated by 3 powerful warlords. The first one, Oda Nobunaga, then Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and the last one was Tokugawa Ieyasu, whom we've heard of before, who was also the winner of the last of these battles, and he was the founder of the Tokugawa shogunate, which also was the creation of the Edo period. And in this Azuchi Momoyama period, a few things were very popular. Some of them are, for example, the wabi-sabi aesthetic. But concerning the literature, it was not so interesting for me to look at. And therefore, we want to move on to the Muromachi and Kamakura periods. Next up, we want to talk about the Muromachi period. That was lasting from 1336 to 1573. It is called Muromachi period because it was named after a part of Kyoto where the shogun was locating his residence at the time. This period was marked by the ruling of the Ashikaga shogunate and the constant warfare between different feudal lords. And despite the political instability, the period was seen as a kind of golden age for Japanese culture and also for the arts, and it was heavily influenced by Buddhism, especially by Zen Buddhism. There are some cultural developments very important to mention here. One is the building of two very important temples until today, the Kinkakuji, the Golden Temple. I've been visiting this temple myself. It is very impressive, and I think it would be even more impressive to visit in the sunshine. I was there when it was a little bit cloudy, and it was already very impressive because it's covered completely in gold. And also the Ginkakuji, which is the silver pavilion. I will blend it in a picture, although I haven't visited myself, sadly. And also the formal tea ceremony was established more and more, and the art of building a rock garden was also established. And the Muromachi literature was marked by a shift from more court-centric literature to a wider audience with genres that were more accessible and entertaining for more people. For the Muromachi period, there are several interesting literary genres as well. One of them is the otozochi. The so-called companion tales are the most representative prose genre of that time. They are short, illustrated narratives that borrowed from a variety of sources, including folk tales, Buddhist sermons, and courtly romances. And unlike earlier, more formal tales, they were written in a simple conversational style, making them popular within the masses. And while most authors are anonymous, they collectively created a body of work that bridged the gap between classical tales and the popular fiction of the Edo period. For drama, there's the no drama that you might have heard of before. It is a highly stylized and symbolic form of musical drama and focuses on profound, often spiritual themes, and its performance is slow, deliberate, and minimalist. Key characteristics include the use of exquisite masks, the so-called no men, poetic language, and a chorus that chants the narrative. Now we will travel back further in time to the Kamakura period that lasted from 1185 to 1333. It marked a profound shift in Japanese history because the rise of the samurai happened in this time. The samurai class was their own societal class and a political organization that was ruling Japan in that time. And they established the first military government in Japan, the shogunate in Kamakura. This is why the period is called Kamakura period. So the power moved from the imperial court in Kyoto from the Heian period to Kamakura, and the warriors were the ones ruling now. So the whole culture was shaped a lot by this military influence. Buddhism was spread to a bigger amount of people during that time, and the time also saw a significant shift in Japanese literature, as we got from this court literature from the Heian period that you will hear about soon, to this time of warfare and the samurai ruling which also had a direct impact on the literature. As this warrior class was ruling at that time, all of the literature was also influenced a lot by the samurai. And for example, there were the so-called Gunki Monogatari, the war tales that were telling about the tragic fates and also the heroism of the samurai in different forms. And some of the genres focused on themes of war, impermanence, but also religious devotion. So the Gunki Monogatari were prose epics, and they recounted mostly the conflicts and the battles of the time. So they were written in a dynamic hybrid style that blended the classical court prose with more vernacular elements. And many works were actually intended for oral performances by itinerant Buddhist monks who recited the tales to the accompaniment of the biwa lute. And a pervasive theme is the Buddhist concept of the impermanence of all things, mujo, which highlights the fleeting nature of power and life. One of the most famous prose works of this period is the Heian Monogatari. I guess you might have heard of before if you've been looking at Japanese literature from the medieval period. It is the definitive work of its genre, and it recounts the dramatic rise and fall of the so-called Taira clan or Heike and their war against the Minamoto clan. And another important prose genre was the Zuihitsu or miscellaneous essays. They were personal works and reflective writings on various different subjects, often blending observations, anecdotes and philosophical musings. Two of the most famous works is the Hojoki. Translation would be An Account of My Hut by Kamo no Chomei, who lived from 1155 to 1216. And it is an essay that reflects on the transient nature of the world from the perspective of a recluse who has abandoned society for a simple life. And it's also influenced by Buddhism a lot. It is a very, very interesting work, and it might shift your perspective on some things. So please look forward to another video on that. And the next one is the so-called Tsuresure Gusa, Essays in Idleness by Yoshida Kenko, who lived from 1283 to 1350. And it is a collection of essays that's celebrated for its wit and philosophical insights into life's follies and simple pleasures. The poetry saw a refinement of the traditions from earlier periods in the Kamakura period, and the central form remained waka that had also been famous before. There was a new aesthetic ideal called yugen, which emphasized a subtle, mysterious and profound beauty beyond the surface. And the poets adopted often a more nostalgic and reflective tone in their poetry writing. That also reflected on the turmoil of the age and the decline of the courtly world that they have been knowing before. Now we want to talk more about the Heian period. That lasted from 794 to 1185. Heian is the former name of the capital Kyoto, modern-day Kyoto. And it was the capital for around 300 years. And before that, Nara was the capital. I will talk about Nara soon. So, the Heian period is very important for Japanese history, as it is considered the pinnacle of the imperial court's power and a golden age of the whole aristocratic culture. So the capital was moved from Nara to so-called Heian-kyo, the name that is today modern-day Kyoto, and the court perfected and refined an aesthetic lifestyle that was often detached from the realities of the countryside and the people living there. And also, this period is very important for Japanese history as it saw a significant decline in Chinese influence, and a uniquely Japanese aesthetic flourished, particularly in fashion and architecture and also in the arts. This is also why some of the most important classics are from the Heian literature. So for the writings of the Heian period, I want to mention 3 very significant works. The first one is The Tale of Genji, or Genji Monogatari. It was written by Murasaki Shikibu, and she was a lady in waiting on the court in Heian. And she was attending the Empress Shoshi, and as she was so close to the court and she was living in these aristocratic fields, she could tell a lot about the life of the people and also what was going on, and she could depict that very well in her writing. And The Tale of Genji is considered one of the first psychological novels of the whole world, because it is dealing with the inner world of the people, the emotions, and how they are grappling with life from the 11th century. And it is telling the story, or the life story, of Prince Genji, Hikaru Genji. And first it's about his early life, then his later life, and also his death. And the final chapters, so-called Uji chapters, shift the focus to his descendants then, particularly to his supposed son Kaoru and his grandson Nio. And the next one is The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, or Taketori Monogatari. The author of this is unknown, and it is considered to be from the late 9th or early 10th century, so even earlier than The Tale of Genji. And it is, I think, the oldest surviving Japanese prose narrative as a monogatari. And it is a classic fantasy or folk tale with roots probably earlier, and it tells the story of a bamboo cutter who is old and childless, and he finds an infant girl called Kaguya Hime, the Princess Kaguya. You might know the story also from adaptations like the movie on Netflix, maybe, Princess Kaguya, I think it's called. And it is about the Princess Kaguya, who quickly grows into a woman of immense beauty and attracts the attention of men, and especially of 5 noble and persistent but unsuccessful suitors. And she challenges them with some impossible tasks. And the tale then culminates in revealing that she is a princess originally from the moon and was sent to Earth temporarily as a punishment. And then it's about her return home. So this is a very important text for Japanese writing, because it's like one of the most well-known folk tales. And I think if you get a chance to read it or to experience the story in some way, I would recommend that you do it. So these are the monogatari. So this is a very particular new genre of prose writing, especially, that emerges in that time. And the other one that I wanted to talk about is the so-called zuihitsu, that could be translated as miscellaneous essays. And one very striking example is the Pillow Book by Seisho Nagon. She was also a lady in waiting at the court and also served the Empress. Here it is the Empress Teishi, and it's from around the year 1000. So also roughly comparable with Murasaki Shikibu. And the Japanese title is Makura no Soshi. And what is interesting is that it's made up of many small episodes, just telling about the impressions of Seisho Nagon at the court. So what she recognizes, what she witnesses, what she thinks about. And they also include a lot of very interesting lists. For example, a list of things that give a clean feeling, or things that make one's heart beat fast, and so on. And it also tells a lot of anecdotes of court events, and also some social commentary. So if you want to learn about the Heian court and how life was at that time, this is definitely, next to the Tale of Genji, it's a very interesting work, and also a very different approach, as it's not a full prose narrative, but it consists of these smaller essay-like structures, and you can just take it in smaller portions maybe. And Therefore, its historical value is also regarded pretty highly, and also the style and the tone are often praised because it is quite witty and also very well written. I have a German translation here that I enjoyed a lot. And then there's one very famous poetry example. That's the Kokin Wakashu, the collection of ancient and modern poems in English translation. It was commissioned by Emperor Daigo and compiled around 905 CE. And it is the first of the great imperial anthologies, collections compiled by decree of the emperor. It is very important for Japanese literature as it was an attempt to establish waka, the Japanese poetry, as a poetry form equal in prestige to Chinese poetry, which was still very influential at the time, and also to set a standard, especially an aesthetic standard for Japanese poetry for the ongoing centuries after that. It contains over 1,100 poems arranged thematically into 20 books. And the preface also discusses the history and nature of waka, and also discusses how to establish criteria for judging whether waka, the writing, is good or not, which is quite interesting to learn about, I think. So after traveling to Kyoto and experiencing and exploring the Heian literature, now we want to travel back further in time. I have been visiting the city of Sakai, which by the way has a very beautiful museum that is definitely worth a visit, to visit the grave of Emperor Nintoku. He had been buried in a so-called Kofun, which is a big keyhole-shaped burial mound, and they are not always keyhole-shaped, but often times, and sometimes they're also round or they have edges, and they were built for the ruling class to bury the clan leaders. So what is interesting to know, apart from the Kofun themselves for the Kofun period, is that Japan did not have any native writing system of itself at that time yet. And the writing system of China was introduced around that time from mainland China. Immigrants coming and also contact with the Korean peninsula increased this. And from these kanji, slowly their own writing system emerged, but only in the Nara period, which we will talk about in a second. But for the Kofun period, you can keep in mind that there is no written record of that time. We don't have any literature, and the only thing we have is like the artifacts that were found in these burial mounds, things like armor, swords, clay figurines, and sometimes bronze mirrors. And they already indicate that there were some people, like a very small elite group, who knew how to write and who had contact with people from China, but there is no literature of that time yet. So, as you might have guessed, the Nara period was called after the capital, Nara. That was established, it is south of Kyoto, and it was modeled after the Chinese city of Chang'an. And it was the first capital ever established in Japan, the Nara capital. There was a dramatic increase in political and cultural exchange with China and Korea, which led to the adoption of new technologies, administrative systems, and also Buddhism. In that time, the state even heavily patronized Buddhism, so that huge temple complexes, like for example the Todaiji with the great Buddha in Nara, were constructed, and others. So while in the Kofun period the Japanese had no writing system of their own, apart from the Chinese writing system, in the Nara period they were building their first slow attempts at the writing for themselves. So it happened primarily through the adaptation of the Chinese characters, which I talked about, the kanji, which were introduced already before. And they had mainly been used for official documents, for Buddhist texts, and especially by the immigrant scribes. But during the Nara period, the Japanese scholars began to use some Chinese characters purely for their phonetic value, so their sound, to represent the syllables of the Japanese language. And they used this rather than the original Chinese meaning, which was very innovative at that time because it was the first time that the Japanese language was actually represented in writing. And there was a new system called Manyogana, which used many different Chinese characters phonetically for the same Japanese sound. And the name comes from the so-called Manyogana, the collection of 10,000 leaves, which we will talk about in a second. It is a poetry anthology which was compiled in this period and that made extensive use of this system. And this allowed the Japanese language to be fully written for the first time in history. So that was very important, as you can imagine, because it was the first time that a Japanese literature really could even start to emerge and the real Japanese writing could even be put down. So that is very interesting to know about the Nara period, I think, and now we want to talk about some major works of that time that were emerging. So we want to look at 3 different works of the time of the Nara period that are very famous. The first one is called Kojiki, which was completed in 712. It is a historical record of ancient mythology and folk songs. Then there's the Nihon Shoki from 720, which is a more detailed chronicle written entirely in Chinese. And then there's also the Manyushu, which is the most famous literary creation of the time, which is a massive poetry anthology that gives us some insights and glimpses into the culture and emotions of the time. And I want to talk about all 3 of them shortly. So the Kojiki, as I said, is the oldest surviving chronicle of Japan, and it was created at the request of Empress Genmei to legitimize the imperial lineage of connecting it to the gods. The text is a blend of myth, legends and historical accounts, written in a unique combination of Chinese characters and phonetic Japanese. I haven't been looking at it myself, but I think it's highly interesting, especially if you're learning both Japanese and Chinese, or if you're familiar with one of the languages or able to speak one of them already, to learn about how this works. And it also tells about the creation of the heavens and the earth, details the divine origins of the islands and the kami, the gods, and traces the imperial line down to the reign of Empress Suiko. So for understanding Japanese mythology, particularly the Shinto religion, this is also a very, very influential work. The second one, the Nihon Shoki, is translated often as the Chronicles of Japan, which was finished in 720, is the second oldest classical history book of Japan and is more formal and more detailed than the Kojiki. It is entirely written in classical Chinese and was intended to present a more official and dignified history of Japan to neighboring countries like China and Korea as well. It covers the same mythological and historical periods as the Kojiki, but offers different versions of events and provides a chronological record of events up to the late 7th century, which is also a very important resource for historians, as you can imagine. Lastly, we want to talk about the Manyushu, the collection of 10,000 leaves. So it is the oldest surviving poetry anthology of Japan, and it was compiled sometime after 759. It contains over 4,500 poems from various social classes, including emperors, courtiers, soldiers and farmers. And it is written in a complex system of Chinese characters known as the Manyogana to phonetically represent Japanese words that I've been mentioning before. And it is also a valuable record of the old Japanese language and how it emerged, as you can imagine. So it's worth looking into that if you're interested. So this is the literature from the Nara period, as much as we know, and that just I wanted to mention these 3 works, Kojiki, Nihon Shoki and Manyushu. And next up we want to travel to two more remote regions in Japan and travel back into modern times, because I have also been traveling to Shikoku, especially to Tokushima, and I've also been traveling to Kanazawa and the Ishikawa prefecture. Two novels are set in Shikoku that I want to mention. The third one is an author that was born on Shikoku. And I want to start with Natsume Soseki. He is a very, very important figure in Japanese literature, famous for works like I Am a Cat, Kokoro, and Botchan. And Botchan is the novel that I want to talk about, which is a satirical account based on Natsume Soseki's own time as a high school teacher in the city of Matsuyama, which is located in the west of Shikoku. It's a town that is also famous for a very old onsen and also for the Matsuyama castle. And the protagonist of this novel has to deal with his colleagues and rebellious students and has to navigate his life in the countryside as he was sent to a provincial town not directly named, and he's just trying to navigate his life. And this satirical account is based on Natsume Soseki's own experiences, and I think it sounds quite fun. I haven't gotten around to read it yet. The next author is not a novelist, but a writer of haiku and tanka poetry. He lived from 1867 to 1902 and he's called Masaoka Shiki. So he was a very important figure in this modernization of Japanese poetry, and he promoted his own style of poetry called shasei, which can be translated as sketching from life. And he rejected the traditional stylized poetic forms in favor of a more objective and direct observation of the world. So his poetic practice was to simply and honestly record what he saw, to make poetry a direct mirror of his environment and his surroundings. And this way you've got scenes that depict the nature of Shikoku or everyday life of his own life. And I think that's also quite an important thing to mention for all of Japanese literature, but also for Shikoku in particular. And the last one is the only living author that I'm mentioning today. It is Haruki Murakami. You probably know him. I don't know if you read something by him. I'm oftentimes surprised by how many people have read some Japanese literature but not Murakami, although I think he's like the most famous author these days. Rightly so or not, you can debate about it, but I like him and I like his writing. And one of my favorite works of him is called Kafka on the Shore from 2002. And a significant part of the story is set in the city of Takamatsu on the northern coast of Shikoku, north of Tokushima, a city that I've been visiting myself. I haven't been to Takamatsu, but I want to go next time I visit Shikoku. And the novel is one of the best novels of Murakami that I read yet. And I just quickly want to mention what it is about in case you don't know it and want to get into it. So it has two parallel narratives that are told. One follows the 15-year-old boy Kafka Tamura, who runs away from Tokyo to Takamatsu to escape a kind of weird prophecy. And his journey then leads him to a private library where he encounters a woman who is around 50 years old and who is also a little bit mysterious. And the other narrative follows an elderly man named Satoru Nakata, who also travels to Shikoku on a secret mission. And you also learn about all of the story and about the characters only from time to time, as it is often the case in Murakami novels. And also this Buddhist pilgrimage route of Shikoku, which leads people to 88 Buddhist temples on the island, is a very important point for the intertwining journeys of the two and is mentioned. So that's also really interesting to know. If you visit Shikoku, it's something that is definitely mentioned and recommended to do, to visit this pilgrimage route and to learn about Buddhism and the nature. So that's what I wanted to mention about the Shikoku authors or the writers connected to Shikoku. Now we want to talk about two authors from Kanazawa in the Ishikawa prefecture. The first one is Izumi Kyoka, who lived from 1873 to 1939. He was a novelist born in Kanazawa, and his works often reflect the heritage of his because they are set in this region. And one of his most representative works is The Holy Man of Mount Koya from 1900, which follows a traveling Buddhist monk who takes refuge in a remote mountain village. And he encounters a beautiful enigmatic woman who cares for him, but he soon realizes that she has a terrifying secret and is bound to a curse. And this tale also has a resemblance to Gothic tales, which is why Izumi Kyoka is oftentimes also considered one of the Japanese Gothic authors. And I have also been talking on this channel about The Surgery Room or Gekashitsu, which is another story by him that is also often considered a Gothic story. So if you want to check that out, I will link it up here and also below in the description of the video. And the other author I want to mention is Seicho Matsumoto, who is a writer of crime and mystery. He was born in Kitakyushu but has a deep connection to Kanazawa because it is the primary setting in his work. And I want to mention one work in particular. I haven't read it yet, but I think it sounds very intriguing. It is called Zero Focus from 1959 and was also turned into a movie. It is about a newlywed woman named Teiko who is left alone after her husband mysteriously disappears just days after their marriage. Her search for him leads her from Tokyo to Kanazawa and to the isolated Noto Peninsula. And then she tries to find out what happened to her husband, which I think sounds also very interesting. So this is what I wanted to mention about Kanazawa, although there are of course more authors that you could check out. So I hope this travel through Japanese literature by the stations of the history could give you a bit of an overview of the literature and the different kinds of genres and also different kinds of forms of literature that were emerging throughout the time. And I think it's super interesting to see how this evolved over time and also how the literature always reflects the culture and the historical situation in which the people found themselves, as they tended to write a lot about what was going on in their surroundings and what bothered them. And that is something that we see throughout all of history and literature of mankind. I would love to read now what you like most about Japanese literature. Is there a literary classic that you can recommend to others, or some modern book or manga that you enjoyed, some kind of poetry or anything? I will make more videos on Japanese literature in the future. I have prepared some and I will upload them one after another, but there will also be more videos on Gothic literature and autumnal videos, as well as my fantasy and sci-fi series, where we are right now in the medieval ages, is also going on. If you have a special request for a video or a question, please drop it down below in the comments. This is where we can discuss everything. Thank you so much for watching if you stay till the end, and I will link other videos that you might enjoy here and also down below in the playlists in the description of this video. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye bye.